Hi, so today we're going to be talking about Strangers on a Bridge by James Donovan. This is a story about a guy named Rudolph Abel. He's one of the main characters, and James Donovan. It's a true story. It takes place between 1957 and 1962. It was made into a movie, Bridge of Spies, back in 2015, and it's one of my favorite movies. And at the time, I didn't realize that it was like a true story and it was based off this book. So it's really good. So once I watched the movie, I was like, oh, now I have to read the book. And it's taken me a long time to actually get to read the book. So I'm finally excited. I'm so excited that I finally got to read it. In the movie, Tom Hanks plays Jim Donovan, and Mark Rylance plays Rudolph Abel. And the movie won a bunch of awards because it was so good. So a little bit about James Donovan. He was in the Navy, and he was like this. He's a lawyer, and he was one of the assistant prosecutors in the Nuremberg trials. So at the time this happened in 1957, he was working in Brooklyn as an insurance lawyer, and Rudolph Abel was a Soviet spy, and he was arrested on espionage. Well, he didn't have a lawyer, so the New York Bar Association picked Donovan to represent him. And Donovan was actually really excited to do this because he wanted to show the world how great the American justice system is, wanted to show it off and give the best representation possible. So at the time, this was at the height of Cold War, and it just finished the McCarthy era, which like blacklisted a bunch of people. So US and Soviet Union was very contentious. There were spies everywhere. This was like the first time in history that we had this many spies everywhere, out and just about. So when Rudolph Abel was arrested, he had all kinds of spy equipment everywhere because he was living here as a photographer, painter, artist. That's how he was able to get around and do what he needed to do. And he had all this equipment with he had like hollowed out nickels that had micro dots in them to make, dead drops and all that stuff. And they found a lot of that stuff. So the evidence was pretty substantial against him. But Donovan was adamant that he was going to give the best case possible. And the American people were irate about this. They wanted to sentence him to death, and they were like, he's a Soviet spy, we should kill him. Because also Rudolph Abel, his rank in the USSR was a colonel, so pretty higher up. So we were like, all the American people were like, oh, we should just sentence him to death, he deserves to die, he's a spy living here, acting like the US didn't have any sort of spies anywhere, especially in the USSR. Like, come on, get real. No. So they had this big long trial, which the book is based mostly on the first trial itself, and it's written like kind of like diary style. So you see he talks kind of what happened on days that were more significant than others, which I thought it was really interesting because it was easier to read that way. It wasn't like it was just all these words on a page and just super, super boring. But anyway, so they have the trial and he is convicted. He goes to Atlanta. He was in Atlanta Penitentiary for most of his time. Well, it ends up Donovan and Rudolph take it to the Supreme Court. So it took a long time to get there, but it went to the Supreme Court. They argued it. It took a while for them to hear back. And remember, this is the 1950s, so every day Donovan would go to a certain restaurant to have lunch because they had, I guess, like a fax machine there. And the court or the reporters, they would send information over to this particular fax machine So that's how they had to get their information. Like, he had to go to lunch every single day until he heard what the verdict, what the ruling was for the Supreme Court. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So Supreme Court came back and they were undecided. They wanted the prosecutor and Donovan to argue again. So they had to wait many more months and then go back to the Supreme Court, and they wanted additional time. So after that is when they finally came to a ruling, a decision on what to do with Abel. Basically, this whole thing was the issue was the initial arrest of Rudolph Abel constitutional, because it was between the arrest happened between two different organizations. It was the FBI and basically the immigration agency. It's like a kind of a different name than what we know of it as now. So who had the warrant? Did they have a warrant? They didn't have a warrant. The agency that arrested him didn't have a warrant to arrest him. So they collected all of his stuff. They went through all of his stuff as evidence, but that should have all been thrown out. So that's the part that went up to the Supreme Court, because this guy is not an American citizen. So do those laws still apply to him? That was the whole point. But of course, you know, the American people were irate about it still. Well, anyway, during this whole time, Donovan kept saying, listen, we have spies in the USSR as well, and other countries. What happens if someone of similar rank is captured? Do we want them to be sentenced to death? No, we have a colonel sitting in our jail system. Why not just wait until this happens? It's gonna happen. Eventually, someone of equal rank in the CIA, whatever, military is gonna be captured. We want to have someone to swap. At the time, no one thought that was gonna happen. They, like I said, they denied. They're like, oh, we don't have spies. We don't have that kind of stuff happening. Right, okay. So, during this whole span, Rudolph's wife and daughter start writing Donovan to help try to get him out of jail. Well, there were letters from his wife and daughter from before, and they were actually read in court. So, in the first court proceeding. So when the wife and daughter start writing Donovan, he's able to compare the language in both of the letters, and he's like, this is not his wife and daughter, right? It was someone working for the USSR government, of course. So he's, you know, writing back and forth, trying to help as much as he can, get things taken care of. He's trying to get Rudolph's belongings sent back to the Soviet Union, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So what happens? The CIA is flying spy planes over the Soviet Union. One of them gets shot down. The pilot's name was Frederick Pryor. And he was supposed to take the little toxin that kills him, that, you know, he kills himself, so he can't be captured. Well, he doesn't. So he is captured and he's put in jail. And they made this huge show of, oh, we have an American, we're holding an American, you know, we captured him, all that crap. Perfect timing, right? Donovan says, see, I told you so. We were going to have this. This was bound to happen. Why not make a swap? So he's back and forth with the government, and he goes really high up in the chain during this whole time. Like, anytime he gets a letter from the wife and daughter, anytime something happens, he's letting Secretary of State know, or this department or that department, Homeland Security, or whatever, all those things. So now we have this guy. So he is finally given permission to go over to Berlin to meet with the wife and daughter, because that's where they're living. They're living in East Germany at this time, which is controlled by the USSR. So he has to make this big trip plan this whole trip as a disguise. He typically has business in London, so he, books the hotel and tells all his friends, letting everyone know, hey, I'm going to London, this is what I'm gonna do, blah, blah, blah. Trying to make this big cover story. Gets to London, he gets picked up by these secretive people, he gets put on this plane, sent to here, sent to there. He finally arrives in Berlin. So they are staying in West Germany because at the time the US did not recognize East Germany, which was like the Democratic Republic of something, whatever. So he has to travel to East Germany with, no money, like he can't have any identification on him, all this stuff. It's super sketchy, super dangerous. So he goes over there and he learns that there's another American being held in East Germany, in an East German prison. He's a PhD economics student named Frederick Pryor. Okay. Oh, and then at the time he also learns that there is another American being held in the USSR. He was traveling over there. His name's Marvin McKinnon. So now we have 3-for-1 deal happening, trying. So Donovan's goal is not just to get Rudolph Abel over to the Soviet Union and to get back Francis Gary Powers. Now he wants to get all 3 of them. So he does some negotiations. He's there for probably 2 weeks-ish. Works it out. They were able to trade Francis Gary Powers and Frederick Pryor, the 2 Americans, for Rudolph Abel. And then in that time, he also was able to negotiate the Marvin McKinnon trade, which happened later. Yeah, so pretty amazing guy. So after all this happened, he's such a great negotiator that Kennedy sent him to Cuba right after during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he was actually able to have released 9,700 Cubans and Americans under Castro. So, yeah, pretty amazing. So if you don't like history or if you don't like law stuff, I don't recommend because it's kind of dry, but if you're really into I'm really into spy stuff and true stories, real things that happen. So I really like this book. It's easy to read, and like I said, I kind of read it I had Tom Hanks narrating it for me, which, it just made it a little bit more fun, and I was able to picture things that were happening and compare them to the movie. The movie is a little different. It definitely has a lot more dramatization, and it focuses more on the SWAT part and what happens over in East Germany, where this focuses more on the trial and things like that. So this is more legal based. But I thought also that his humor is really light, even though there's some really serious situations happening. So I really enjoyed that. So there we go, Strangers on a Bridge.